Came home early that Tuesday because the office AC broke down. Our building manager sent everyone home at noon, said the repair crew needed the whole afternoon. I remember thinking, great, I'll mow the lawn, maybe grill something for dinner. My wife had mentioned she wanted burgers. I pulled into the driveway and noticed my brother-in-law's truck parked along the curb. That's odd, I thought. Gary worked construction. He wasn't supposed to be off on a Tuesday. I figured maybe his crew hit a rain delay. It had been drizzling on and off all morning. I didn't think much of it. Gary had a key. He'd stop by sometimes when he was in the area, grab a beer from the fridge, watch whatever game was on. We'd been close like that for years. Or I thought we had. I walked in through the side door off the garage, the one that opens into the laundry room. I set my bag down. I could hear the TV in the living room, some daytime talk show, the volume low. I called out. Nobody answered. I figured my wife June was upstairs taking a nap. She'd been doing that lately. She said the spring allergies were wearing her out. I opened the fridge and grabbed a water. Stood there for a second, looking at nothing in particular. Then I heard it. A sound from upstairs. A laugh, her laugh. And then his voice. I didn't move for probably 10 seconds. I just stood there with the refrigerator door still open, the cold air hitting my arm. Some part of my brain kept trying to explain it away. Maybe they were watching something on her laptop. Maybe she'd called him up to help move furniture. She'd been talking about rearranging the bedroom. Maybe. I set the water bottle down on the counter without making a sound. I walked to the staircase. I didn't rush. Looking back, I think I already knew, and my body was moving slowly on purpose, giving my mind a few more seconds before everything changed. The bedroom door was shut. Sunlight came through the hallway window and hit the carpet in a long stripe. I stood outside that door and listened. There was no question about what I was hearing. 58 years old, 31 years of marriage. I stood in my own hallway like a stranger. I didn't knock. I didn't yell. I turned around, walked back downstairs, picked up my phone, and hit record. Then I walked back upstairs and opened the door. I'm not going to describe what I saw in detail. I'll just say this. My wife of 31 years and my brother-in-law, a man who had stood beside me at my father's funeral 12 years ago, were in my bed. In my house. On a Tuesday afternoon, June screamed. Gary scrambled. I stood in the doorway, phone pointed at them, completely calm in a way that surprised even me. I said, I've got everything I need. Then I turned around and walked back out. I sat in my truck in the driveway for 40 minutes. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I just sat there watching a squirrel run back and forth across the telephone wire above the street. At some point, June came to the front door in her robe and called my name. I didn't look at her. Gary's truck was gone. I drove to a hardware store and bought a deadbolt. I came back, changed the lock on the bedroom door while June stood behind me asking me to talk to her, to let her explain, to please just calm down. I said I was calm. I put the old doorknob in a paper bag and set it on the kitchen counter. Then I got back in my truck and drove to my son Kevin's house. Kevin was 29. He lived about 15 minutes away with his girlfriend, a sweet woman named Priya. I had not called ahead. He opened the door and took one look at my face and said, "Dad, what happened?" I sat at his kitchen table and told him everything. He didn't say much. He kept nodding slowly. Priya brought out coffee none of us touched. When I finished, Kevin looked at the table for a long time. Then he said, "Uncle Gary." Not a question, just those two words, like they were rocks he was turning over in his hands. I stayed there that night. Kevin gave me the guest room. I lay on top of the covers in my work clothes and stared at the ceiling and thought about 31 years. I thought about the year we nearly lost the house, when my business went under. The way June sat across from me at the kitchen table with a legal pad and helped me figure out which bills to pay first, which to defer, how to buy us 6 more months. I thought about the vacations we'd taken, the drive through Montana the summer Kevin turned 12, the week in Maine where it rained every single day and we laughed about it the whole time. I thought about Gary at my wedding, how he'd given a toast that was mostly jokes and everyone laughed, and then he got serious at the end and said I was the best man he'd ever known. I didn't sleep. The next morning I called an attorney. Her name was Barbara Olson, and a colleague had mentioned her years ago in passing, said she was tough, fair, knew family law cold. I'd never thought I'd need that number. I found it in an old email and called before 8 in the morning. She picked up herself, which surprised me. I told her the basics. She told me to come in that afternoon and to bring any financial records I had access to. Bank statements, investment accounts, property documents. I spent the morning at Kevin's place, going through my email, pulling together what I could. My wife and I had always kept mostly separate accounts. Not out of distrust, just habit from early in the marriage when we both had our own finances before combining for shared expenses. The house was in both names. We had a joint savings account and our own individual checking accounts. I had a retirement account through my work that I'd been contributing to for 22 years. When I got to Barbara's office, she was exactly what I needed. No nonsense, direct, didn't waste time on sympathy she could tell I wasn't looking for. She looked at the video on my phone. She said it was useful, but told me Texas was a no-fault state, which meant the infidelity itself wouldn't determine asset division. However, she said, if I could show that marital funds had been spent on the affair, gifts, hotel rooms, meals, that was a different conversation. She told me to pull credit card records going back 2 years. I hadn't even thought about that. I went home that evening while June was out. I didn't know where, didn't ask, and I sat at the desk in the study and pulled up 18 months of statements. I found things I hadn't been looking for. A hotel in Austin on a weekend June had told me she was visiting her college roommate. A restaurant I'd never been to, charged twice in one evening. Dinner, and then 2 hours later, drinks. A gift store in the Galleria. I printed everything and put it in a folder. June called me 3 times that evening. I didn't answer. She texted, "We need to talk, please." I didn't respond. The following Sunday, our daughter Ashley called me. Ashley was 26, lived in Denver, worked in marketing. She talked to her mother. I could tell from the first word she said, "Dad," that the conversation was not going to be straightforward. She said June had told her that I'd been distant for years, that I'd been emotionally checked out of the marriage, that what happened was complicated and not just her fault, and that I needed to hear June's side of things. I sat very still. I asked Ashley if she had talked to her brother. She said Kevin had said some things, but that she wanted to hear from me. I told her what I had seen and when I had seen it. I told her about the hotel in Austin on the weekend she thought her mother was visiting a friend. I told her I had documentation. There was a long pause. Then Ashley said, "Dad, I know this is hard, but Mom said you two have been having problems for a long time." I said, "When your grandmother was in the hospital for 6 weeks, I didn't have an affair. When the business failed and we had nothing, I didn't have an affair. I worked 3 jobs for 14 months. I don't know what problems your mother is describing, but I was there. Every day." Another long pause. She said she needed time to process. I said that was fine. I told her I loved her, and I hung up. That one hurt more than finding them in the bedroom. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Gary called me the following week. I don't know what I expected him to say. He started with, "I know there's nothing I can say." I let him keep talking. He said it had been going on for almost a year. He said he was sorry. He said he was sorry. He said he hated himself. I listened to all of it. Then I said, "I recorded the 2 of you. My attorney has a copy. Don't contact June on a cell phone I'm paying for." Then I hung up. I moved back into the house because Barbara advised it. Leaving voluntarily can complicate things in a divorce. June moved to the guest room. We passed each other in the kitchen like 2 people in a waiting room, careful, polite, saying nothing. Some mornings I'd make coffee and pour 2 cups out of habit, and then stand there looking at the second one. Old muscle memory is a strange thing. The divorce filing went in 6 weeks after that Tuesday. June hired an attorney named, and I'm not making this up, Gerald Patterson. Kevin laughed when I told him that. Said it sounded like a TV movie. I needed that laugh. The process was not fast and it was not painless. June contested the division of the retirement account. Her attorney argued she had contributed to my career by managing the household. Barbara argued, effectively I think, that I had also worked during those same 31 years and that my contributions to the retirement account were consistent and documented. The hotel records and credit card statements I'd pulled showed approximately $11,000 in marital funds spent during what Barbara called the period of the affair. The judge noted it. We settled 8 months later. I kept the retirement account whole. We split the equity on the house after it sold. June got a portion of the joint savings. It wasn't perfect, but it was fair enough that I could live with it and move forward, which was the only thing I cared about. I took 2 days off work when the settlement came through. I drove out to the hill country alone. I've always liked it out there. The limestone and the cedar and the way the sky opens up once you get past the suburbs. I stayed in a small cabin outside Fredericksburg. I sat on the porch in the evenings with a beer and watched the deer come out at dusk. I thought about what 58 years old looks like from the outside and what it feels like from the inside, and I decided those two things don't have to match. I had not spoken to Ashley in almost 3 months by then. Kevin had been steady throughout, there for every call, no judgment, just present. Ashley had gone quiet after that first hard conversation. She showed up at my apartment. I'd rented a 2-bedroom place across town on a Saturday morning in October. I opened the door, and she looked like she hadn't slept well in a while. She came inside and sat on the couch and said, "I went to see the statements, Dad. The ones you told me about." Kevin showed me the folder. I poured her coffee and sat across from her. She said, "The Austin weekend." I called her roommate. Her roommate said they hadn't gotten together since 2022. I nodded. Ashley put her hands around the coffee mug and said, "I'm sorry I didn't believe you." I had been ready to be angry about that. I had rehearsed being angry about it in an honest way, not a dramatic one. But sitting there, looking at my daughter's face, I couldn't find the anger anymore. It had been replaced by something tireder and quieter. I said, "You believed your mother. She's your mother. I understand that." She cried. I sat next to her on the couch, and she leaned against my shoulder the way she used to do when she was small, and we'd watch movies together on weekend nights. I didn't say anything for a while. Sometimes there isn't much to say. She's been coming over for dinner most Sundays since then. She and Kevin and Priya. I've gotten better at cooking than I ever was when I was married. Turns out I just never had occasion to try. Last week, I made a brisket that Kevin said was the best thing he'd ever eaten, and Kevin is not a man who hands out compliments easily. I believed him. I'm not going to tell you I figured everything out, because that would be a lie and I've had enough of those. I'm not going to say the betrayal stopped hurting, because it didn't. Not completely. There are still mornings when I wake up, and for about 4 seconds everything is normal. And then I remember, and there's this specific weight that settles in. I imagine that goes away eventually. People tell me it does. But here's what I know for certain. The version of my life I was living, the one where I trusted the wrong people without question, where I assumed that 31 years meant something to everyone involved, that life is gone, and the one I'm building now, smaller in some ways and clearer in others, is mine in a way the old one never quite felt. I am 58 years old. I sleep well most nights. I have 2 kids who call me on Sundays. I have a brisket recipe that apparently holds up under scrutiny. That's enough. For now, that's more than enough. People ask me sometimes if I regret how I handled it. If I wish I had yelled, or confronted them differently, or done something more dramatic in that moment. And I always think about it for a second before I answer, because I want to be honest and not just say what sounds good. The truth is, no, I don't regret any of it. Here's what I've come to believe after going through something like this. The way a person responds in the worst moment of their life tells you everything about who they actually are, not who they thought they were. I didn't know, standing in that hallway, what I was made of. I'd never had reason to find out. 31 years of a mostly quiet life doesn't test you the way one Tuesday afternoon can. What I did, picking up that phone, hitting record, walking back in calmly, that wasn't a plan. It was something that came from a part of me I hadn't met before. And afterwards, when I sat in the driveway for 40 minutes watching a squirrel run across a wire, I wasn't falling apart. I was deciding. There's a difference. June made her choices over a long period of time. So did Gary. And every choice either of them made, every lie, every afternoon, every weekend in Austin that never happened, it all went somewhere. it accumulated. And when I sat down with 11 months of credit card statements and started pulling receipts, every single one of those choices had left a mark. That's not luck. That's not fate in any mystical sense. That's just the math of how decisions work. You spend marital money on a secret, and that spending exists. You lie about where you've been, and the truth of where you actually were still exists. The record is always there. You just have to be calm enough and clear-headed enough to go find it. The hardest part wasn't losing June. I want to say something kind here, but I'm going to say something true instead. The marriage I thought I had wasn't real, which means I didn't lose what I thought I lost. The hardest part was Ashley. Sitting across from my daughter and hearing her tell me, gently, that her mother said I had been checked out for years, that tested something in me that the discovery itself never did. I could have gotten angry at Ashley. I had every right to. But I kept coming back to the fact that she was 26 years old and her mother was her mother, and she was trying to make sense of something that didn't make sense. What she needed wasn't my anger. She needed evidence and time. I gave her both, and she came back. That, to me, is what intelligence looks like in a real situation. Not the kind you demonstrate on a test, but the kind where you have to decide whether to be right or to stay connected to the people you love. I chose to be patient. Kevin showed me what steadiness looks like. Ashley showed me what it looks like to be willing to change your mind when the facts change. I'm proud of both of them in ways I don't have words for. I'm 58. I have a brisket recipe and a 2-bedroom apartment and Sunday dinners that I look forward to all week. I built that from nothing, after everything, in about 8 months. If that's not evidence that a person can start over and find something worth keeping, I don't know what is.